And this brings up a question that I'd love to explore it with you, like the whole, like one kind of term that you could use that summarizes a lot, but it's kind of the center of gravity of kind of our little subculture, I would say, in this vector embedding, is kind of like collective intelligence, right? Like how we can, like, the us as individual intelligence come together to form some collective intelligence. Um, and then there's the question: what's the relationship between artificial intelligence, collective intelligence, or and natural intelligence? Like, and I thought about this a bit. It feels like a triplet from these metaphysics things, like natural intelligence, artificial, and collective. And so, just on that level, like, I find it interesting that artificial intelligence, in a sense, is, though it has like one API that you can prompt, like kind of this localized thing, it is trained on all of our knowledge of humanity, right? So in a sense, an artificial intelligence is not really an artificial natural intelligence, more an artificial collective intelligence, right? Because
Mm,
it kind of is trained on all the collective data. And with approaches like what you're exploring, and also the kind of active side of things where it's also more prompted with a collective prompt, right? And operates on that level, and it can do that. And then the other side, the more natural side of that collective intelligence, um, is basically kind of who talks to whom about what, right? Like how do these stories flow through the natural, warm conduits of culture. And I'm kind of meditating for a while now, like, again, like there are so many ways you can do this, but I'm searching for this one kind of essential architecture or ontology that can unify um, all this stuff into kind of one system that can do anything it wants. Um, and yeah, so I thought about like the because in a sense you can just GPT-10 or something like that. You could just give it all the context, all the information, just tell it what outcome you want, and it would basically do magic, and you could not think about any systems design at all, like any mechanisms at all. You just give it the whole picture and tell it kind of like how to what you want to happen. But somehow I still feel like something would be lost, or I don't know, like I just feel like exploring like more ontology that has actual method mechanisms and stuff like that, that decides how it happens, and we can understand these mechanisms and see if we resonate with kind of the values embedded in them. And so, yeah, what I'm looking at is if every GitHub repository, if a Git repository, um, plus whatever it needs to have this kind of social sharing collaboration thing going on, that is the fundamental unit. Let's just call it a dream node. The placeholder, like that's the dream node. Then every dream node should be able to kind of what is kind of the most fundamental stack that every dream node kind of comes with it, which basically just means like you set up a GitHub repository and everybody just clones that, right? Like a seed repository almost. Um, what is the stack that the minimum stack that would make this scale to encompass every use case you like? And what I see is kind of so every dream node is represents some idea. So that's kind of privileged. You don't need to explicitly put that in there, but it's also a place people can have that link, access to that repository, and do that meet there. But it's also a DAO. It could also be turned into a decentralized autonomous organism with a click. It's also an AI agent that knows itself. It knows kind of what it's representing, and it's also kind of it can also compute. It's also a fundamental unit of computation, and through kind of submodule relationship, you could have a holonic computation system. Um, and kind of I'm wondering like what would what is part of that fundamental kind of set of tools um, that would make that would combine all these words into a common language, that the collective intelligence people and the AI people would use something where they agree like this fits, like everything we want to do can fit in that. Yeah, I'll stop here. Like, see kind of what comes up for you.
Totally. I was just jotting down that concept of a dream note. I really like the that as like the smallest unit. And I've been focusing a lot on design memos, although I think they're more concept memos. This is something we actually have been popularizing at Block Science as a way to like surface and then act on um, change as the organization grows. It's more and more difficult to, get feedback from everybody. So we've been working on these like concept notes, which is basically like it uses pathos, logos, ethos. So, the reason you have credibility to raise this claim, you use logic and you use, emotion to like convince people this is a thing that is worth addressing. And then you break it out into very simple, like, why do we need this? Or what is this? Why do we need it? And how does it happen? And it's just basically like a two-page format, and basically like here's a concept memo. I love that as a dream note, and I've started doing this for like all of the things that I want to see built, but I don't have time to build them. I just write a memo like here's a thing, conviction voting or osmotic funding, osmotic governance. I'm starting to like conceptualize these into just like one pager, two pagers, being able to point to all the reference stuff, and then yeah, having that, yeah, design, or sorry, not that, dream notes. I like that as a concept there. Sorry, but I feel like you went beyond that. You were saying, so uploading these into like shared repositories, being able to like interact with each other's dream notes, or having the dream notes be able to interact even through like LLM agents.
Yeah, like basically, um, so if you use Git repository as the starting point, like, I mean, we actually everything I just talked about is just stuff inside of Git that would be imported as submodule. So I think Git is already the perfect obviously, but kind of the most low hanging fruit of how that probably many repositories will just import by default because it's so useful, um, would be, I think, to have this AI agent thing, because that's kind of what AI is becoming, right? AI agent is the thing, more and more. Um, and then also kind of a DAO, it could, do all the good stuff from DeFi. Um, and one thing that I remember now that I forgot before is I think it would also be kind of make sense if a dream node would also know how to represent itself in the metaverse
Mm.
in a 3D state, uh, where like the user interface is just something, but 2D, but it knows how it looks when you want to see it. And
Mm.
this could be just the back end for whatever you want to do, but it basically the question is the whole how would we with the least amount of violence necessary the path of least resistance melt down the entire digital layer and build it back up again with a kind of ontology that is humane, that is backwards compatible with our code, something like that. And so kind of like the user interface, if you think about it, the whole way that it works is kind of like you have folders and files and a desktop, right? It's just bureaucracy in it. It's the same machine out there is also in there. And we
Yeah.
don't want more of that, right? We want something more organic. So that's the kind of the idea. Like, how can the thing, um, what would like an indigenous mind want as a user interface to interact with the story? And it's much more fluid. It's much more spatial, haptic cognition and stuff like that, right? Um, so yeah, I'm basically exploring, and I think you have some really amazing pieces that you're aware of, where you're like, oh, I would like to have this just out there that everyone with a click could use, right? Um, and imagine what that does for a self-organizing culture where new projects bubble up all the time, and they would just like this become a DAO, or like this have some common law trained AI, for example, that would tell them how to navigate like these layers of the system and stuff like that. So that's kind of
Mm.
like the prompt. of like, yeah, that's like collecting uh, the default plugins, right? That every unit should have access to. That's kind of like the thing I'm looking
Totally. Yeah, man, you keep saying stuff that is so like I just got to write it down. I've started taking some notes. The backwards
for.
compatibility with our souls. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
And this actually was one of the first conversation topics that I had with Orion that made me realize like, yeah, even like the whole folder structure, like we've embedded this like it's either in this folder or it's not, and there like we've already coded this like um and also, I mean, folders are great if you remember what folder it's in, but if you don't remember what folder it's in, folders are actually a nightmare. You have folders of folders of folders of folders of folders, and then you're trying to find where in that tree is your stuff, as opposed to just having like it sorted by maybe relevance or like just like a graph-based structure where like you can traverse it. I guess you can traverse a folder structure too, but it's far less, I think, intuitive. It's much more like hierarchical, let's say, as opposed to relational. So I think there's so many different ways that we can approach these things that we were just born into these like into the technical debt, right? Or I guess we weren't born into it because we kind of grew up with these technologies, or maybe I did. I'm probably a few years older than you. Um, but how can we rethink these things, as you say? How can we melt it down and build it back up again, backwards compatible with our souls? So like, yes, please. How do we do this?
Right, right. Yeah, and the thing that you brought up with the kind of, what was it called? The vector embedding or the vector,
Vector store, local vector store. Yeah.
vector, you know, yeah, like that is kind of the distance by resonance, right? Like things that resonate with them when the semantic is basic. Um,
Right.
to me that feels a lot like, soft links or soft distance, something like that. I wouldn't know what the right word would be, but if you then add that to, like, Git uses the folder kind of to interact with the operating system or interface with it, but actually it turns the folder into something more like a graph database through the submodule function, because like a submodule is just, it just knows where it comes from anywhere. Like it's not reduced to the being in the same tree, part of the tree, that makes it so rigid, right? The the video that you sent, like the part that I watched was about this, like mind mapping that doesn't work. Like you start out strong and then it just becomes awful over time. And it's like I know that
Mm.
from school, like it was always like you're like, oh, these categories don't fit and stuff. And yeah, guess what? Like if
Yeah.
you were working in a bureaucracy, it's amazing, because if you just interact with this artificial substrate that has nothing to do with creation and nothing to do with like the fluidity of reality and the DAO and whatever, like the more fundamental things, well then it's
Mm.
great. But for everything else, it doesn't fit, because it's just a construct of our imagination. It's like not a real thing. And all you need is just to break that stupid constraint, um, which in a digital is trivial, and use stop module. So now you can do everything. You can do the mycelium thing, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think like with that we can make it nonlinear, the whole thing, and that would, yeah, I don't know. I'm a huge fan of it. Like I learned more. I just
Yeah.
learned a few more things about it. Like, oh my god, this stuff is so profound.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I agree with you. Like these abstract components are like the most interesting, but also the most difficult in terms of like deployment, right? Because as soon as you try to deploy something abstract, you have to make trade-off choices. And then, when the rubber hits the road, it's like, okay, cool. I want this pure abstract thing because it has all the properties I want. But as soon as you try to make that, an interface or something people can use, you have to like pick this tool or that tool, and it's like, oh crap, like I don't, eventually more tools will come, but today these are the choices that are available, and all of them have things you don't want along with things you do want. So it's always, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's a trade-off game, which is I guess why engineering is a thing, right? Because it's like in theory this is great, but in reality we have these trade-offs. So what trade-off and for who, and how do we measure the risk and the offset, and like
Right.
this is basically what a lot of engineering is about, is managing those messy trade-offs, because we're taking pure science and then we're applying it So that there's a lot of questions around how do you apply it, where do you apply it, what do you use to apply it, and that implies a whole bunch of like messy decision making because it's humans are involved and you have to decide, is this person or that person, is it this tool or that tool, um, and people aren't always going to disagree. So it gets into this like, yeah, really um, messier trade-off space, which is hard to navigate, which I think is why I stay in like the more on the research side and the modeling side, because I'm interested. I think deployments are important and we need them, but they also like I see them all as like temporary. Yes, we can deploy now, but in a year or two, this technology is going to be outdated and we're going to have to update, our whole stack anyway. So I'm much more interested in like, how do we move forward the patterns? And then, people can deploy the patterns. They need to be deployed because we need to figure out where they break and how we need to iterate them. But I see it as like, we're still so early in terms of like building the tools that we're dreaming about. We have to build the infrastructure for the tools that we're dreaming about, and Git is one of those pieces that's like, this is so beautiful and so like useful.
Yeah.
But then where it gets deployed, is it GitHub that's owned by Microsoft? Okay, there's problems there, but I mean the core tool, great, useful. The stack that's around it, great, useful, but where are the trade-offs? And yeah, there's always trade-offs in deployment.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you, like, so were you like uh, old enough when kind of Web 1 was forming to participate in that?
I mean, I wrote my first website in grade 10 computers class. I wrote a website about emus, and I think it was like there were probably other emu websites, but it was back when I was like, I remember thinking like, will there be a bunch of pages on emus, or like, will my page be the page on emus? Like, it was that, I don't know, it was 1990. What would grade 10 have been? 98? No. Jeez. I was born in 84. So yeah, I was 16 by the millennium. I think I was doing my first coding stuff, but I mean, I wasn't like a prodigy on the computer or anything. I was just like around when they came out. I feel like my knowledge of technology and the sophistication at which like I can see it now has been basically the last few years, like hanging out with Block Science and Zargam and all of the people in this space. I definitely have been on a learning curve like that.
Mhm. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, our first computers class, like we were learning like HyperCard and like Corel Draw, like all these companies that don't even exist anymore. And I'm like, wow, I mean, it was good, I guess, to have your hands on computers when you're young, but I really didn't understand what was going on, and probably a good thing anyway, because not a lot of those technologies are even around anymore. So
Right. Yeah. The reason why I'm asking is that Jim Rudd is one of these kind of elders in the tech space, right? And he wrote an article once called "How Apps Still Be Efficient." Um, and it's so interesting because my kind of in my formative years of relating to the digital, apps were already a thing, or pretty early at least in that
Hmm.
process. And so I never understood. For me, a website was always less than enough. I always want the app. The app is better. It runs smoother. It's on my home screen. Like my kind of thoughts were this grid app layout. Like this is how
Yeah.
that thing works. Like the internet is that. Like basically. And
Right.
then I discovered color chain and stuff, and was like, oh, nice. They want to break that open and make it interoperable, and Nico with Adam, that same thing. But then I heard about like, yeah, Web 1 was that already. Like the from the very get-go, it was totally decentralized. Like everything that Web 3 is now doing, I didn't really understand for quite a while, like how almost all of that was already there. It's only the user-friendliness kind of was lacking. Probably some other things that I'm not aware of now, but the thing is, I'm wondering what like Web 1 with HTML, HTTP, and all of that browsing basically. Like you have a browser that does have different addresses and then different things show up. So it's kind of this universal app in a sense. I never recognized it as that. It was just this crappy website. Like it was a tool to view crappy websites. but it's actually the most profound app on my computer is a web browser. And
Mm.
I'm wondering kind of where this is going, and if that GitHub Pages approach that is the starting point is not maybe a very, very profound, because like if we get better infrastructure that's accessible through the browser, then we totally kind of overcome this trade-off thing of fighting for market share, because it's the browser, it's the web, right? And so again, like, how to take the path of least resistance, where you don't need to convince anyone to come on there. It's just another link, click, right? Then an app you install. You don't need a user, create a user in another system, stuff like that. And what comes to mind is that the Ethereum engine that uh, that what's the name? I'm blanking on the name right now. Whatever. There's the Ethereum engine, and the guy that created this is awesome. And he and they built this powerful thing that he says they can bring it to Unreal Engine 5 kind of graphic over time, like that, and it runs completely in your browser. Um,
Wow.
and to me, that sounds like an amazing, amazing portal into a open metaverse. Um, because like the whole two-dimensional user interface is basically done through the browser in most open way. So if that remains, and you can just like put in just another link in the browser, and suddenly you are in a world rather than on a two-dimensional site, then to me that feels like maybe right upgrade or something like Dream Note, that you maybe most fundamentally kind of discover in a three-dimensional virtual or augmented reality or whatever. But it does the same thing again. You can click on stuff, or like you can do action with the three-dimensional object, and it brings you to some other place. And so like the whole you could totally change the vibe of what it means to, like the could be the tool exploration word. And right now the metaverse, it seems like just internet distraction and internet entertainment, right? Like people are like, oh, it's amazing word, it's like video games all the time. And it's like, I don't want to live in a video game. Like I like
Yeah.
reality. I would like something that kind of helps me grow as a person and helps me discover new great people to hang out in real life, you know.
Yeah.
But
And fix problems.
right, stuff like that. Um, and something, yeah, and so kind of think, what if the metaverse, we reframe it and we take this story as a place more serious, um, like more explicit, you know, like what if the
Totally.
space consists of places that are stories, where you meet people, and every place has a story, so you also learn about it. Like every object knows what it is, and you can learn about it and find other things to learn about, and other people to discover this way, something like that.
Totally.